an honor. This morning I preached in a church. I was the first American to preach there. So this is a great day for me. This is my 28th trip to the Philippines in the last 23 years. So it's not my first time to preach in a Filipino church. And we've had some great experiences all over this country. Dearly love coming here. It is the first foreign country I ever preached in. And now I've preached in 30. Just been all over the place and enjoyed it. If the Lord allows the schedule to hold, I will be in two more countries this next year I've never been in before. And the Lord has just blessed. But that was my first foreign trip. I came to the Philippines and preached not far from here for Brother Jimmy Victorino. The very first service I ever preached, and I've preached there every year since. And isn't just a tremendous, wonderful joy for me. I think of the Philippines as my other country. It is my second home. And I just love it dearly. And I'm so pleased to have this invitation to be with you, dear folks. Would you go to James chapter 5 with me? So my name is Phil Stringer. I have been a pastor, a Bible college president. Now I am a full-time evangelist in the United States. Been a preacher for 45 years. And so grateful that God has given me this kind of opportunity. James chapter 5, verse 7 through verse 11. Be patient, therefore, brethren, unto the coming of the Lord. Behold, the husbandman waiteth for the precious fruit of the earth, and hath long patience for it, till he receive the early and latter rain. Be also patient. Establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord draweth nigh. Grudge not one against another, brethren, lest ye be condemned. Behold, the judge standeth before the door. Take my brethren the prophets who have spoken in the name of the Lord, for an example of suffering affliction and of patience. Behold, we count them happy which endure. Ye have heard of the patience of Job, and have seen the end of the Lord, that the Lord is very pitiful and of tender mercy. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this great opportunity to be with these dear folks. Have your hand upon this time as we look to call people's attention to your word. May the principles in this passage touch our hearts and lives. Anybody here that's not saved, I pray you speak to them this evening and work among your people in Jesus' name. Amen. Excuse me, you can be seated. In the Old Testament, God had a system of worship for the children of Israel. He did not ask them. He didn't ask them how they wanted to worship. It wasn't their right to decide. He instructed them. And he gave them a system that had 5 sacrifices and 3 feasts and 600 some commandments. They said, this is how you worship me, with these sacrifices, these feasts, and these commandments. And they all pointed to the fact that one day a Messiah was going to come, and when the Messiah came, he was going to die and pay for the sins of mankind. That's the Old Testament system. You didn't get to say, Lord, I don't feel like doing sacrifices. I don't want to go to any feasts this year. If you wanted to be right with the Lord, you did the 5 sacrifices every year, the 3 feasts, and obeyed the 600 some commandments. That was God's system. That was what he designed. When Jesus came, the whole system changed. The whole purpose of the Old Testament system was to look forward to Jesus. When Jesus died, in the temple, there was a place called the Holy of Holies that was so reserved for approaching the holiness of God that only one person could go into it, and they only went once a year. There was a curtain that kept everybody out. The curtain was actually curtain woven into another curtain, woven into another curtain, woven into another curtain. It was a foot thick of curtains. It was 100 feet high. It was huge. But when Jesus died, from the top of that curtain, the curtain was ripped and went all the way down to the bottom. And now everybody had access into the Holy of Holies. And a whole new system began. Under this new system, this is how God is worshipped. God has designed for groups of believers to come together and carry out a commission that he's given to them. Amen. This replaces the offerings. It replaces the feasts. The 600 commandments, some were based on God's morality, and they're still with us. Some of them were based simply on the system. Some were based on the nation of Israel, and those are gone and replaced with some other commandments. Again, God doesn't ask us. God doesn't say, is it okay if I ask you to worship me this way? This is God's command. This is God's plan. I commend you all. You're being obedient to God's plan for this dispensation, for this time tonight. You've gathered together in a group. Amen. The very word for church means gathering or assembly. You have to be close enough that you can gather together. You and I are brothers and sisters in Christ, and I rejoice in that. We're not members of the same church. I cannot gather with this church on a regular basis. I'm a member of a church about a 10-minute drive from my house, which is a long way from here. But you folks are being obedient to the system and plan that God has designed. I loved reading your mission statement, because that is exactly, that is exactly what God has designed for us. That is how we worship the Lord today. It's wonderful. Now, the big challenge is to keep people being obedient to this and to keep people worshiping the Lord. Lots of people start out. They don't stay with worshiping the Lord. This passage, some years ago, when I used to live in Florida, I was president of Bible college. And every Thanksgiving, which was a big American holiday, there was a church about a 2-hour drive away that would have a special Thanksgiving service, and they would ask me to speak at their service. So it's Thanksgiving morning. My family's getting ready to leave. I'm just sitting reading my Bible, getting ready to go, and the truth of this passage jumped out at me. It's about patience. Patience is mentioned 5 times in 5 verses. It's mentioned in 4 out of the 5 verses. But like most languages, the Greek language, and God gave the New Testament in Greek, it's translated to English for us in the King James Bible. Words have multiple meanings. And sometimes we get fixed on one meaning of a word. And in the Greek language, they have a lot more words. And so a lot of times an English word that has several meanings, there's just one Greek word for this meaning and one Greek word for this meaning, one Greek word for this meaning. The word patience has at least 4 different Greek words that are translated patience, each one of them properly. Each one of them means patience, but each one of them means a certain kind of patience. Normally when we say patience, we mean the ability to sit back and wait without complaining, to stand in line. Filipinos have lots of lines, God bless you all. I've never been good with lines. I don't have that kind of patience. I either didn't notice it before you just put it in. There's now a line in the airports when you get here and you're coming through immigration and customs for senior citizens to go right up to the front. God bless you, I just became a senior citizen. I just qualified for the lines. I just noticed the lines. I love it. I used to stand and stand and stand and wait in your immigration lines, and now I can go right to the front. I don't have the sit around and wait kind of patience. But did you know that the Greek word for sit around and wait is never used one time in the New Testament? Not used in the Bible at all. The word translated patience here, that's the right word. But the word translated patient means to keep on working patiently to the result. Doesn't mean to sit back. It means to keep on working patiently. And you see that because it talks, the context and the things that it talks about here. Keep enduring, so forth. And I want us to learn something about that kind of patience. Keep on serving the Lord. Amen. Verse 7. Be patient, therefore, brethren, unto the coming of the Lord. It tells us how long to be patient. Keep on working till the Lord comes. Amen. I mean, he either comes for us in death or he comes for us in the rapture, but whichever one, keep on working until that happens. Amen. Anybody think that's happened yet? You look at the world around us, I picked up enough of the testimonies to know folks are concerned about the ungodliness all around us. I certainly am in my country. We have a new wave of ungodliness in my country in the last few weeks. It's been amazing and horrible. And one thing I'm sure of, Jesus hasn't come back yet. So since that's when we get to quit, we're supposed to still be working. Amen. It's not quitting time yet. It's serving time. And the Lord gives this example, so you understand that truth. It's the example of the farmer. See, lots of people start serving the Lord, but they don't see everything they want to see right away. So they quit. They get discouraged. How much harvest does the farmer get on the day he plants the seed? The answer is, he gets nothing that day. He plants the seed so that he can have a harvest later. Keep on serving the Lord. What you do for the Lord now has a harvest later. That is true in your own life. It takes a while sometimes to grow, to conquer some sins. It takes a while to grow and to develop some skills in serving the Lord. It takes a while to grow and win some people to Christ. It takes a while to grow and build ministries. Just like the farmer plants today for what he can reap down the road. You serve the Lord today for what you can see accomplished down the road. Amen. It also tells us something else. The wise farmer doesn't just plant. The wise farmer doesn't just work the ground. He looks to God for rain. Early and then later. See, the wise farmer knows there's something more than what he can do. He does everything he can, but there's some things only God can do. And so he waits for God to do what only God can do. He said, you be like the farmer. You serve the Lord. You serve the Lord today, even though you do not reap the harvest today. You serve the Lord, keep serving, do everything you can do, and then you look to the Lord for the Lord to do what you cannot do. Be patient. Keep serving. Verse 8. The command is repeated. Be also patient. Same word, same command, same word in Greek, same word in English. Be patient. Be patient. Have you ever noticed this maybe when you were a small child? Sometimes mom and dad will give the same instruction over and over and over again. You know what they're doing when they do that? They're telling you what's important to them. When I was a boy and I was first learning to drive, 16, that's driving age in the United States. And I've taken driving lessons. I've gotten my license, and now I'm going to drive the car for the first time all by myself. My mom is scared to death. I have an afternoon job. I've been riding my bike to my job when everybody else drove for 3 years. I started working there. When I really was 14, I started working there. I rode my bike. I now, for the first time, am going to drive my car. I earned the money. I bought it. I paid for it. I had it 6 weeks before I could get my license. It just sat at the front of the house for 6 weeks because I wasn't eligible to drive it yet. And I'm going to drive for the first time. I am so excited. My mom is scared to death. All morning long, she's saying things like, Phil, don't get in a wreck. Phil, don't hit anybody. Well, it's a good thing she never saw Manila traffic. But Phil, be careful. Don't get in an accident. And finally, look, I said, Mom, thanks. Thanks for telling me that. If you hadn't told me, I'd have gone and run over the first person I saw and hit the first car I was behind. But now since you told me, I won't. I used that story, and years later, came time to teach my son how to drive. And I gave him lessons. And I got him ready. And I helped him get a car. And now he's gone and gotten his license, and he's going to drive to work for the first time today. You know what I wanted to say? Robbie, don't hit anybody. Don't hit any cars. Be careful. Don't get in an accident. But I knew he'd given me this illustration so many times. I knew what he would say if I did that. My mom was really saying, what I was really saying was what was important to me. That's why you keep repeating it. It is God that keeps repeating to us. Be patient. Be patient. It's again, in a couple verses, be patient. Take the prophets as an example. Take Job as an example. Be patient. This is what's important to the Lord. Amen. Not that you just start serving,
Man, you all did what you were supposed to tonight. You gathered in the church. That's the plan for serving in the New Testament. And you did what you were supposed to do tonight. God bless you. Amen. Keep serving. Amen. Keep serving. Not just keep on serving. Be also patient. Establish your hearts. For the coming of the Lord draweth nigh. Here's why you ought to be patient. Jesus could come back at any moment. So that was 2,000 years ago. I know, but a day is like 1,000 years with the Lord, and 1,000 years like a day. It's just been a couple of days to Him. The Lord is coming back. Amen. What do you want the Lord to find you doing when He comes back? Do you want to have to be shamed? Embarrassed? You keep on serving. You keep on being patient. The Lord is coming back. You have a reason. When? I don't know. Anybody that tells you they know got it wrong. The Bible tells us no man knoweth the day nor the hour. Don't pay any attention to those predictions. Every year has somebody predicting. That's when the Lord is coming. And I've watched a lot of predictions come and go just in my lifetime. I've read about lots of others in the past. I don't know when, but I know I'm supposed to be living like He could come right now tonight. And He could. And that's how I'm supposed to be focused. The Lord could be coming at any moment. Now, interestingly enough, verse 7 and verse 8 are about being patient. Verse 10 and 11 are about being patient. Right in the middle of 4 verses about being patient, there's a verse that doesn't mention patience. And it doesn't look, at first glance, like it's a verse about patience. Would you look with me in verse 9? Grudge not one against another, brethren, lest ye be condemned. Don't carry a grudge against your brothers and sisters in Christ. Now, when I was first getting ready to preach this, why? Why would God stick a verse about another topic right in the middle of 4 verses about patience? And then it hit me, there is a reason for this. That the message of the passage is keep on serving, keep on serving, keep on serving. What's the number one reason people quit serving? They got mad at somebody. I got mad at the pastor. Turns out pastors aren't perfect. I didn't even know they were human. I got mad at the song leader. I got mad at the person that normally sits next to me. I got mad at the person who sat where I wanted to sit. I got mad at the person that forgot to shake my hand. Or shook my hand twice because they forgot they shook it the first time. I don't like how loud the sound system is. Or I couldn't hear very well. There are too many songs. And not enough songs. Or they didn't ask me to sing. You know, nobody ever asked me to sing. You know, there is a reason for that. I mean, the biggest reason that people quit serving the Lord, they got mad at somebody, almost always over something stupid. Don't have a grudge one against another. If the command is keep on serving. But if you won't get mad at each other, it'll be easier to keep on serving. It'll be easier to obey that command if you obey this command. This is an important, serious command. Would you go with me? We're going to come right back here. Would you go with me to Galatians chapter 5 for just a moment? I was preaching in church one time, and you find a lot of churches will do this. They put up a banner in the back, a message they want everybody to see when they go out of the building. Not unusual. But in this church, and I'm preaching there, the big banner in the back said, "No biting." I'm kind of wondering, is that really a problem here? I mean, usually if the sign that says no parking, it's because somebody was trying to park there. If you see a sign that says no smoking, it's because somebody was trying to smoke there. And this church had a sign that said no biting. So after the service, pastor's taking me lunch. I said, "Pastor, I have to know, do you really need a sign that says no biting?" He took me to Galatians chapter 5 and verse 15. But if ye bite and devour one another, take heed that ye be not consumed of one another. Right. He's not talking about biting with your teeth. Right. He's talking about biting with your lips.
Nothing hinders the work of God like Christians getting upset with each other and talking about each other and gossiping about each other and getting angry at each other.
Amen. I will tell you, far more churches have been destroyed by the foolish words that people say than have ever been destroyed by bad doctrine or persecution. Amen. God knew exactly what he was doing. Go back to James chapter 5. God knew exactly what he was doing when he put this verse in about bear not a grudge right in the middle of a passage about keep on working. Amen. If you won't let yourself get angry at the brethren, you know, what if my brother or sister in Christ made a mistake? What do you mean, what if? We're all still carrying sin natures. Right. We all do stupid things. If you're around anybody long enough, you get upset with everybody sooner or later.
Right. Husband and wives get married, young couple, and they're all excited, and they just can't wait to be with each other. And now this is going to be the perfect marriage, and we're never going to argue, and we're never going to be upset.
It's just people wouldn't get married if they didn't think that. I never try and talk anybody out of thinking that. That's part of the fun of life, is the while that you think that. And then you actually get married. And instead of seeing what somebody's like a couple hours a day, you find out what people are like 24 hours a day. Sooner or later, you get upset with everybody. Sooner or later, you sit under a pastor's ministry long enough, you get upset with that pastor. But if you think that's tough, sooner or later, if he's your pastor long enough, he gets upset with every one of you. He's got all of you to deal with. So just forgive one another and go on. Amen. Don't speak evil of one another. Don't get angry. Don't create problems. Amen. Why? Well, look what it says. Grudge not one against another, brethren, lest ye be condemned. You get judged if you do this.
Behold, the judge standeth before the door. There's judgment right around the corner. Right. Yeah. I say, hey, I can get away with a bad attitude because nobody knows what I'm thinking. Really?
Say, I can get away with gossiping because only one person hears me. Only repeats it to one person. 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 To finally find somebody who repeats it to a lot of people. You got to deal with it. The God of heaven knows everything you're thinking. Most of the people that quit serving the Lord at church never tell anybody the truth about it. They never tell the pastor why they quit. They never tell the other friends at church the real reason they quit. But God always knows. Amen. Always. Never fails.
The judge standeth right around the door. Amen. I mean, here's the picture.
Okay. I'm thinking about grabbing somebody's wallet tonight. Okay, but the police are right outside. Would that slow you down some? Or, you know, boy, I'm the worst trouble I ever got into as a kid. My mom baked some fresh cookies for a Boy Scout group or something that met near us. I forget who it was for. And they were peanut butter cookies, and they smelled so good. And they just come out of the oven. And she put them out. And she said, Phil, don't you touch those cookies. Those aren't for us. Don't you touch those. Okay, Mom. I went out the front door of the house, around the house. The back room was the kitchen. Snuck in the back door and got those cookies. That's because I thought Mom was down in the basement doing the laundry. And she wasn't. She was just in the next room. She could hear me getting those cookies. And the next thing you know, she was in my face. This is not 5 minutes after she told me, do not touch those cookies. Do you think if I had known she was going to catch me, I would have done that? Are y'all ready? You don't ever have a bad attitude toward one another, but what you get caught by God the Father. And often by people too. You're going to get caught every time. So if you know you're not going to get the cookies, and you're going to get a whipping for trying to get the cookies, would you try to get them? Do you know that's the last time I ever made that mistake? Hey, listen, here's a good reason. Don't have a grudge against one another. You'll get caught 100% of the time. Watch this. You see a mom and dad, and that they have children, and the children are fighting. We just spent 2 weeks with my son and my 2 grandsons right before I came over here at Christmas time. And so, you know, they'll keep an eye on the 2 grandsons and make sure they treat one another right and all that. Here's what the boys forget. Anytime they get mad at each other, the parents are both of their parents. They can't get mad at each other, what they get mad at their parents' other son. And their parents love both of them. And Papa loves both of them. So you can't get mad at each other without offending me. You can't get mad at God's son or God's daughter without offending God. And you can't get by without getting caught. So be smart enough not to do it. My son never caused me one moment's trouble when he was a teenager. You hear about how bad the teenage children preachers are. And I was ready to deal with it. It never once caused me any trouble when he was a teenage boy. One time. And I asked him one time, where I said, were you just that good, or were you afraid of what your dad was going to do? He said, most of the time, I was that good. But he said, when I wasn't that good, I was still afraid of what my dad was going to do. I mean, don't bear a grudge against one another. Amen. No biting. Amen. That's God's rule. You're not supposed to be a hindrance to one another and a discouragement to one another. Amen. No evil speaking is put in another passage in James. Verse 10. Take my brethren the prophets who have spoken in the name of the Lord for an example of suffering, affliction, and of patience. So we have the whole Old Testament. Much of the Old Testament is the story of God's prophets, what they went through, how they were dealt with, how they were treated. He said, look at them and let them be your examples. Would you go with me to Hebrews chapter 11 for just a moment? We'll not be there long, but just to Hebrews 11, and we'll come right back here. And we can read the entire chapter, but we won't for time's sake. Let's pick up about verse 32. These guys are supposed to be our examples. Don't let your example be somebody that's got a bad attitude or quit serving the Lord. Let these men be your examples. Hebrews chapter 11, starting verse 32. What shall I more say? The time would fail me to tell of Gideon, of Barak, of Samson, of Jephthah, of David also, and Samuel, of the prophets, who through faith subdued kingdoms, wrought righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions. That's pretty impressive, isn't it? Wouldn't that have been something to have been with Daniel when he stopped those lions? He gets thrown in the lion's den. The lions are kept there on purpose. They're not domesticated at all. They're supposed to be a way of frightening people by giving a horrible death to folks that the government wants to punish. They're kept hungry before someone is thrown into them because they want the lions to rip them to pieces. Would have been something to have been there with Daniel. He gets in the lion's den, and those lions, I don't know when exactly the Lord worked on them, but this is my guess. The lions come running at him, roaring, ranting, ready to rip him to little pieces. And they stop right when they get to him. And they're like little kittens rubbing on his feet. That would have been something. So, boy, that's exciting. I'd like to try that. What if you didn't know what was going to happen when the lions got to you? That'd be an interesting moment. Verse 24. Quench the violence of fire. Daniel, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego get tossed in the fire. Boy, that must have been something. They had told Nebuchadnezzar they didn't know whether God was going to deliver them or not. They knew he could, but they didn't know whether he would or not. That's always been true. Sometimes God delivers people from persecution, sometimes he doesn't.
Right.
But they knew this. They weren't going to worship his gods.
Amen.
They get tossed in the fire, and immediately they don't burn. Not only do they not burn, there are 4 of them instead of 3.
Right.
Jesus himself comes and roams around with them in the fire. That must have been something. They say when you get older, and as a senior citizen, I'm now qualified to talk about when you get older. When you get older, your memories of your youth, the stories get bigger and bigger as you tell them. How would you try to make that story bigger 30, 40 years later? You run into elderly Shadrach, runs into elderly Meshach, and elderly Abednego. And Abednego says, you remember when we got thrown in the fire and it didn't burn? And Jesus himself came and walked with us in the fire and talked with us.
Amen.
How do you make a story any bigger than that? You can't exaggerate that one. That would have been something. You say, well, this being a prophet's pretty good. Escaped the edge of the sword. Out of weakness were made strong. Waxed valiant in flight. In fight, turned to flight the army's aliens. Women received their dead, raised to life again. Well, so far, it's pretty good. Yeah, I'll take these guys as examples. That all sounds like a lot of fun. And others were tortured, not accepting deliverance, that they might obtain a better resurrection. Others had trial of cruel mockings and scourgings, yea, moreover, of bonds and imprisonments. They were stoned, they were drawn asunder, were tempted, were slain with the sword. They wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, tormented, of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered in deserts and in mountains and in dens and caves of the earth. Some of the prophets just had the greatest experiences. And some of them had the most terrible.
Right.
Take them to be your example. You serve the Lord.
Amen.
You serve the Lord whatever set of experiences you get. If you get to have the mouths of the lions stopped, well, serving the Lord's pretty easy. If you're the ones being tortured, serve the Lord anyway.
Amen.
God has a different will and a different plan and a different purpose for all of us, and none of what he does is a mistake.
Right. Amen.
No matter what your life is like, no matter how you're treated, no matter what happens, if people betray you, if you're treated unfairly, if you're put at risk, no matter what happens, just keep on serving the Lord.
Amen.
Back to James 5. Take my brethren the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord for an example of suffering affliction. The way they were willing to suffer through difficulty, you be willing to suffer through difficulty. Affliction and of patience, just keep patiently serving the Lord.
Amen.
Verse 10. Take my brethren the prophets. Verse 11. Behold, we count them happy which endure. We don't count people happy that quit. Nobody ever celebrates quitting. Nobody ever says at the end of the life, I'm glad I stopped serving the Lord. Nobody ever honors the people who quit. You know who we count happy? The ones who, when they got knocked down, got up.
Amen.
The people who were lied about and then lived the truth.
Amen.
The people who were tired and kept going. The people who had hardship and difficulty but never stopped.
Right.
That kept on serving. We look back and say, that's who was happy. Quitting never makes anybody happy in the long run. I've asked people, are you happy that you stopped serving the Lord? And nobody ever looked at me and said, well, sure. And in fact, they'll tell you how miserable they feel, how bad they feel, how guilty they feel. We count them happy which endure.
Amen.
You've heard of the patience of Job. I mean, Job kept on serving in the worst possible circumstances. I'm not exaggerating when I say that. You've seen the patience of Job. The Bible tells us a story. Here's Job. And Job is referred to as a godly man. And in chapter 2, he's referred to as the godliest man on the planet. That's quite a statement. I know some people I consider godly. I'm not willing, I know if I'm willing to vouch for any of them, say they're the most godly person on the planet. But Job was wealthy. He was the wealthiest person in Asia, in his region. He loved his children and his God. And he was the godliest man there. And one day, the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? I want you to understand this. This all comes from a debate going on between between the Lord and Satan. And Job didn't even know anything about it. Sometimes I've said to myself foolishly, if I just understood what God was doing, I'd feel better about going through this. Maybe not. God and Satan were simply having an argument, and God was using Job as an object lesson. The Bible doesn't tell us that God ever told him what was going on. I don't know if he'd have felt better or not. Said God's using you as an object lesson in an argument with Satan. Yeah. Wealthiest man in the region. But in one day, he lost all of his wealth and went from being wealthy to being destitute. As a pastor, I've been with people when they were going through hard times financially, but I've never been with everybody who lost everything in a day. More than that, all 10 of his children died in a day. As a pastor, I've been with people when they were losing a child, but I've never been with anybody when they lost 10 children. You can't imagine what he's going through, what it feels like. And he did not understand what God was doing. You and I wouldn't understand what God was doing if we were in that same spot. But he went right on and honored God and served God. So the Lord says to Satan, hey, have you seen my servant Job? And Satan says, act only because he's not hurting. You let me put him in pain, and he'll turn on you. The Lord says you can touch his body, but you can't kill him. So he gives him boils. I don't know if you've ever had a boil. I've had two, both on my back of my neck. Different times. A boil is an infection that gets in a tiny pore of the skin. And as the infection grows, it takes that little tiny pore and makes it get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger till it's the size of an egg. It's not designed to be that size. And stretching it to that size hurts and hurts and hurts. He said, one of the times I had a boil, I was preaching a revival meeting. And I went to church that night, and I was preaching, and I couldn't concentrate on my preaching because the back of my neck hurt so bad. I finally told the pastor, get me to a hospital. I have to do something about this. We went in the emergency room of the hospital, and I said, cut that thing out. They cut it out. The surgery felt better than the boil did. But he didn't have one. The Bible says they were on the top of his head. They were on the bottom of his feet. Can you imagine trying to walk if you had a boil on the bottom of 1 foot? You couldn't put any weight down? Imagine what it'd be like to have boils on the bottom of both feet. You couldn't take a step. He had boils on his face and all over the front of him and over his legs and on the back of his legs and on his back. He had boils everywhere. When we see him, he's in an ash heap with a piece of broken pottery. And I can tell you what he's trying to do. He's trying to cut open those boils and use the ash to try and soothe the horrible pain. But he can't get to the boils on his back. He's in such terrible pain, in such terrible circumstances, his wife betrays him. He says, won't you curse God and die? Can I tell you ladies a secret? The single most powerful thing in the lives of your husbands is the words that you as a wife use with them. God gave you to be an encouragement to them, and you are the most important encouragement on the face of the earth. And you have no idea how important the words you use are, because we men won't admit it when we need help. It's just our nature.
I'm not one of those foolish people, by the way. I have these foolish that humans are just human and men and women are really the same. We are not. We're dramatically different.
Right.
For example, if you walk by somebody and they're crying,
And you ask them what's wrong, in the middle of their tears, they say, nothing. That's a woman every single time. Men don't do that, none of them. On the other hand, if you find somebody who will drive around for hours and hours and hours, rather than admit they're lost and need help, that's a man. Every time. Women never do that. And I'm just going to tell you, Mrs. Job, and we have to understand she was going through all the same horrors the first day that her husband was, but she failed the test that day. You know what the Bible tells us about Job? He honored the Lord and kept on serving the Lord.
Had 3 friends show up. His friends, they're there thinking they're going to help, but they're examples of a bad theology that's very popular today in my country, very popular in your country. It's called prosperity theology. The prosperity theologians say if you're right with God, you're never sick. If you're right with God, you're never poor. If you're right with God, you never have any problems. And that's what these people, 3 men, were trying to tell Job. The reason you're going through such heartache is because you've sinned. Confess your sin and get it right. And Job kept saying, I have not sinned. By the way, this is the most spiritual man on the planet saying that. They kept saying, no, you wouldn't be sick if you wouldn't have boils if you didn't sin. Your children wouldn't have died if you didn't sin. You would have lost your wealth if you didn't sin. And this goes on for 32 chapters. And they were completely wrong. By the way, the prosperity theologians of today are completely wrong as well. Never in the Bible does it say if you're right with God, you'll lead a problem-free life. In fact, the truth is, if you're right with God, sometimes you have more problems because you draw the persecution and opposition of even men. So, well, that's some story. Job keeps right on serving the Lord. And right on serving the Lord. And right on serving the Lord. And even when these men argue with him, he doesn't bear a grudge and quit serving the Lord. He keeps right on serving the Lord. Then another guy speaks up. He's a complete idiot. For 4 chapters, he makes no sense at all. And have you ever been around people who just talk because they like to hear themselves talk? That's who he makes me think of. And then finally, God speaks up. Because if you'll notice, as you have heard the patience of Job and have seen the end of the Lord. Are you ready? Reading about Job in all of his agony is not the end of the story. You know how it ends? The Lord speaks up, ignores the young idiot, and speaks directly to Job. And he says, who is this that darkeneth counsel without knowledge? He begins to have a conversation with Job, ignoring the rest of them. And to prove how foolish and limited man is, the Lord asks 64 different science questions. And men can't answer any of them. God knows the answer. Yeah, where were you when I began everything? You didn't exist. Here's one of my favorites. I have mentioned this in the Philippines before. Here's one of my favorites. He said, who put the snow in the air? Do y'all know there's not snow everywhere? There's snow in my country right now. And there's no snow here. And you folks are always apologizing to me for how cold it is in January. I could be in Chicago right now in blizzard conditions. Trust me, this weather is okay. But I was in a church one time, a Filipino church one time, and I was making this point, and he said, who put the snow in the sky? And I said, why do you think God never put any snow in the Filipino sky? Somebody in the back yelled out, because he loves the Filipino. I'm just telling you, there's 64 questions there that men cannot answer. I mean, we get all caught up in how we know everything. We don't. You're living in God's universe, and you don't know very much of it, and you ought to stop all the time to honor who God is. And then he asked Job, what about Behemoth? Behemoth
is described in such a way that only the Brontosaurus dinosaur fits the description. Well, evolutionists say there weren't any dinosaurs on the earth with men. That's what they say, but how do they know? Were they there? You find their tracks together. They painted pictures, old ancient man painted pictures of the dinosaurs, including the Brontosaurus. How did they know what they looked like if they'd never seen one? But the Brontosaurus is huge. Its tail knocks down trees. And God is saying, in effect, do you want to argue with the God that created the Brontosaurus? And then he asks him about Leviathan. Leviathan is a fire-breathing sea monster. So if those aren't real, how do you know? Every culture has legends of them. It's described right there in Job 41. Fire comes out of its mouth. And he's saying, in effect, do you want to argue with a God who created fire-breathing sea monsters? And in chapter 42, Job says, I get it. You're God.
Amen.
That's the only real issue here is your God. And then Job, the Lord's speaking to Job, and he says, Job, pray for your three friends. Because he said, if you don't pray for them, I'm going to do to them what I did to you. Boy, Job really is a spiritual man. Because you know what I'd have been tempted to say? Go right ahead. He said, Lord, they'd really learn if you did this to them.
Right.
They wouldn't be prosperity theologians anymore if they had to go through this.
Right.
That's what I'd have been tempted to say. But you want to know what Job did? He prayed for them.
Amen.
And God spared them.
Amen.
And apparently Job and his wife got things straightened out. Because he has 10 more children.
Right.
That's usually a good sign you're getting along fairly well. Then he gets twice the wealth that he used to have.
Right.
He has double the children too, because he's got 10 in heaven. And 10 on the earth temporarily.
Right.
And the end of the story is that Job is doing better than he was in the beginning.
Right.
Keep on serving.
Amen.
Just keep on serving. A number of years ago, more than 20 now. More than 40, I'm sorry. Now. It's in my 20s. I was running a Christian camp. We were having a training week for the staff. The staff was in their work for 12 weeks in summer. We're having training week. And I'm in a training session with the staff, and I found out, I didn't realize that one of the most famous Baptist preachers in America was being given a tour of the camp while we were in training. And I found out, and I got him to go get him and bring him over and said, man, I'd like to have you speak to the staff. He said, Phil, I appreciate the invitation, but he said, I have to leave. I have to be somewhere at a certain time. I got to leave in 5 minutes. I said, speak to the staff for 5 minutes. It's okay. There's 3 things I want to tell you. Here's the first one. Don't quit. See, you can survive anything other than quitting. You can survive other people's mistakes. You can survive your mistakes. You can survive opposition. You can survive problems. So that you can survive anything other than quitting. So don't quit.
Amen.
So here's the second thing I want to tell you. He said, don't quit. What you're doing is too important.
Amen.
It matters. It influences what happens in the lives of people.
Amen.
What you're doing is too important. Don't quit. You want to guess what the third point was? Don't quit. Don't quit. Because there are people that you are the example to.
Amen.
And they're going to do what you do.
Amen.
And if you hang on and keep serving the Lord, they will find a way to hang on and keep serving the Lord.
Amen.
But if you quit serving the Lord, they will quit serving the Lord.
Right.
He said, so don't quit.
Amen.
Did y'all get it?
Amen.
Keep on serving the Lord patiently. But I don't know what's going to happen. Neither do I.
Right.
Just keep on serving the Lord.
Amen.
You'll like the end of the story better if you keep on serving the Lord.
Amen.
Just keep on serving.
Amen.
And whatever you do, don't quit. Just keep on serving.
Amen.
And glory to God,
However your life turns out, whatever situations you go through, they'll all be different.
Right.
You keep on serving the Lord.
Amen.
And God will do something with you, and it will be a life worth living.
Amen.
And the end will be great. So you mean the last chapter here on this earth? Why? It's not really what I meant. I said the end will be great. One day, you stand before the Lord Jesus, and you get prepared for an eternity of serving the Lord. And God will pass out the appropriate rewards to the people who are faithful to Him. And for eternity, you will have the blessings of those rewards. And the last chapter will be great.
Amen.
It'll be a long chapter too. But the last chapter will be great if you keep on serving the Lord. God bless you. Thank you for being in church tonight. Pastor.